Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Gabriela Alcaino. Teens' rejection leads to tragedy. Teenagers can sometimes display aggression towards their peers, behavior often dismissed as part of growing up, with hopes they'll outgrow it. Yet we sometimes overlook the severity of such actions, as a violent teenager can pose a serious threat to their surroundings. Moreover, this unstable age often coincides with first loves, and when those feelings are not reciprocated, it can lead to tragedies. Such was the case with Gabriela Alcaino, a schoolgirl whose story shocked not only Chile, where the tragedy took place, but all of Latin America, leading to the enactment of the Gabriela Law. The girl met a tragic end at the hands of her boyfriend, a fellow teenager. She had broken up with him due to his temper and controlling behavior. The boy didn't take it well, resolving the matter in the most drastic way. He assaulted and took the life of the girl to whom he had recently professed love. He also took the life of the girl's mother, who became an accidental witness. Family and friends of the victim later claimed the tragedy could have been avoided, as the suspect had been stalking and harassing his victim. He broke into her home, stalked her in various places, and threatened to take her life if she didn't return. Dozens of witnesses heard these threats, but no one imagined he would follow through. Who was Gabriela Alcaino? Gabriela Alcaino Danossa was born on May 17th, 2001, in the capital of Chile, Santiago. She was the only child of Frederico Alcaino and Carolina Donossa Campos, and the first grandchild in a large, loving family. Her paternal uncle Rodrigo became her godfather and doted on her, just as her grandfather Carlos saw her as the center of his universe. Gabriela grew up surrounded by love and care. Her family wasn't wealthy, but they belonged to the middle class, doing everything they could to provide Gabriela with a good life, a solid education, and a good upbringing. When she was only 5 years old, her parents decided to divorce. Gabriela lived with her mother, who didn't remarry and devoted herself to raising her only child. Her father soon remarried, and Gabriela gained 2 younger half-brothers. Despite his new family, Frederico continued to support his ex-wife and daughter financially and stayed involved in Gabriela's life and upbringing. Gabriela was a kind, open, and friendly child. She was somewhat shy and modest, but this didn't prevent her from making friends and getting along with her peers. She had an angelic appearance, which elicited admiration and delight from all who knew her. Gabriela excelled at school, loved music and dancing, and was also good at drawing. Her parents did their best to nurture her talents. She adored her younger brothers, spending weekends and holidays at her father's house, which was nearby. Her childhood, overall, could be described as a happy and carefree time, surrounded by loving family members. First love. At 15 years old, Gabriela, like most of her peers, fell in love for the first time. The boy's name was Fabian Cesares Aravan, a fellow student at her school who was only a year older. Their romantic relationship was initially innocent. They would walk hand in hand, eat ice cream at cafes, steal kisses, and generally appeared to be a happy couple. Fabian came from a respectable and intelligent family. His parents were well regarded and sought to provide him with a solid education and raise him to be a good person. However, Fabian himself was considered withdrawn and secretive, speaking to others reluctantly, avoiding direct eye contact, and always looking away. Given his non-confrontational nature, many assumed he was shy or had adolescent timidity, but it's more likely he suffered from social anxiety. Gabriela even introduced Fabian to her father, who approved of her choice, finding the young man calm, dependable, and rational. He had a serious conversation with the boy, asking him to take care of his daughter, and Fabian promised not to harm her or let others harm her. Initially, their relationship was harmonious, with Fabian genuinely trying to be attentive and caring. However, this harmony didn't last long. After a few months, his controlling and cruel side emerged. Cesare sought to control every aspect of Gabriela's life, exhibiting jealousy, deciding who she should and shouldn't associate with. He checked her phone, demanded immediate responses to his calls and messages at all hours, and when this didn't happen, threw tantrums. A young tyrant and tormentor. For the first 6 months of the relationship, Gabriela tried not to give too much importance to her boyfriend's outbursts of anger and jealousy. She was madly in love, tried to comply with all his demands, and naively believed that things would soon change, and her beloved would become the same sweet and caring boy who had recently won her heart. However, Fabian only grew more irritable, volatile, and aggressive. He began to wear Gabriela down emotionally, but over time, he stopped at mere verbal abuse. He might slap her, grab her hair, or her hands. In most cases, these actions didn't leave noticeable marks, but sometimes friends began to notice bruises on her wrists and shoulders, the places where Fabian had gripped her roughly and shaken her forcefully. Alcaino tried not to complain or tell anyone about what was happening, but her friends and family began noticing her depressed state and her eyes perpetually wet with tears. She was no longer the smiling, open, and sociable girl she once was, gradually distancing herself from friends, avoiding contact with those Fabian forbade her from speaking to. Repeatedly, Gabriela tried talking to her beloved, but to no avail. She also broke off the relationship several times, only to return under Fabian's pressure. This went on for over a year. Breakup, stalking, and threats. In the fall of 2017, Fabian found himself in trouble for attacking a classmate. Although the incident didn't occur at school, it wasn't clear what happened. He was accused of mistreatment and assault, facing possible jail time, but the case was settled out of court. Fabian was still expelled and had to complete his education through homeschooling. After this incident, Gabriela decided to end things with Fabian for good. However, he wasn't pleased. At first, he apologized, promised to change, and asked her to come back. But after her refusal, he began stalking, blackmailing, and threatening her if she didn't resume their relationship. Fabian lurked around Gabriela's school or home, even trying to climb into her room through the window. He called her dozens of times from different numbers, sent texts, voice messages, and social media messages, harassing Gabriela. His messages ranged from tearful apologies to threats, but Gabriela remained resolute in ending the relationship. Sometimes Fabian would disappear for a week or more, giving Gabriela hope he had moved on, but he'd reappear, terrorizing her and refusing to leave her alone. He followed her everywhere, like a shadow, and could show up at the most unexpected places, screaming and causing a scene. Gabriela grew fearful of being alone, always going places with friends or family. After school, she went to her mother's work, and they'd go home together. When she needed to travel, she asked her father or uncle to accompany her. This continued for several months, and Gabriela was exhausted, though she tried not to complain. The beginning of a series of tragic events. At the beginning of 2018, a terrible tragedy struck the Alcaino family when a burglar broke into the home of Frederico's second wife and took her life. The children were at school, and Frederico was at work, leaving her alone. The perpetrator, a previously convicted neighbor, was caught immediately. Gabriela and her mother did everything they could to support the grieving Frederico and help him with the children. This tragedy temporarily distracted Gabriela from thoughts of Fabian, who disappeared during this period. Gabriela also focused on preparing for entrance exams, dreaming of becoming a student at one of the most prestigious universities in Santiago, with aspirations of studying journalism or advertising. However, the tragedy was just the first in a series of heartbreaking events for the Alcaino family. By May 2018, Fabian reappeared, beginning to stalk Gabriela obsessively. She felt unsafe everywhere, as her ex-boyfriend could climb over her home's fence or show up near her at the supermarket or mall. In early June, Gabriela sent her 2 closest friends screenshots of her messages with Fabian, along with some voice messages where he threatened her, demanding she resume their relationship. Gabriela admitted she feared for herself and her loved ones. However, she didn't tell her family about the stalking and threats to avoid worrying them. The last family celebration. On June 10th, 2018, the Alcaino family gathered at grandfather Carlos's house to celebrate his 80th birthday. Sadly, this joyous family event turned out to be the last day of life for Gabriela and her mother, Carolina. The evening seemed happy and uneventful. The house was filled with laughter and music, and the large family enjoyed a big meal together, celebrating Carlos's milestone and wishing him good health and many more years. Gabriela played with her younger brothers and the children of her uncle Rodrigo, though she appeared somewhat troubled and distant. Her uncle decided to talk to her, asking if everything was all right and if anything was bothering her. Gabriela only gave a sad smile, shrugged, and said she was nervous without specifying why. The uncle chose not to press, thinking she'd share when ready, but later regretted this decision deeply. After the party, Frederico drove his ex-wife and daughter home. He kissed Gabriela on the forehead, told her he loved her, and assured her she could count on his support in any situation. Then he returned home with his younger children. This was the last time he saw his eldest daughter and his first wife alive. A brutal crime. Around 4 a.m. on June 11th, Fabian, armed with a hunting knife, climbed over the fence of his ex-girlfriend's house. He intended to enter Gabriela's bedroom through the window and attack her, but suddenly the lights went on. The back door opened slightly, and Carolina appeared. She couldn't sleep and came to check on the noise. Fabian pounced on the unfortunate woman, pushed her back inside, and began stabbing her furiously. In total, he stabbed her 36 times, with most wounds landing on her chest, neck, and head, leaving her no chance of survival. Carolina managed only a couple of screams, but the noise woke Gabriela, who ran downstairs to find out what was happening. As she descended, she saw a bloodied and enraged Fabian, who caught and dragged her down. Gabriela held her phone, desperately trying to call emergency services, but couldn't. Fabian assaulted his ex-girlfriend, then stabbed her forcefully in the chest, piercing her heart. The single blow ended her life. He then moved her to the kitchen, where Carolina's lifeless body lay. He tried to erase his traces, wiping fingerprints and cleaning bloody footprints. He then washed himself and the murder weapon in the bathroom, and quietly left around 5:30 a.m., leaving the house unnoticed by neighbors. In the following days, he acted as though nothing had happened. The grim discovery and the first suspect colleagues began to worry when Carolina missed work for 2 days and didn't answer phone calls. She was responsible and wouldn't disappear without reason. Her boss contacted Frederico to find out what had happened. Frederico was shocked and tried calling Carolina, but her phone didn't answer, and Gabriela's was off. He called his brother Rodrigo, who hadn't seen or spoken to Gabriela or Carolina since they parted ways after Carlos's birthday. Frederico then left work and headed to Carolina's house. The house seemed empty, but their car was in the garage. Frederico circled the house twice, knocking on doors and peering through windows, but hesitated to go in, even though he had a spare key. He called the police, asking them to check the house. The officers, upon learning he had a key, wondered why he hadn't used it, but Frederico expressed fear of what he might find inside. At 11 a.m., he opened the door and entered with the officers. They saw 2 lifeless bodies in pools of blood on the kitchen floor. Carolina and Gabriela had been dead for over a day, but Frederico, overcome with grief, screamed for an ambulance, demanding someone save them. They calmed Frederico, but his behavior aroused suspicion, and he was led outside to a police car for questioning. When he tried to leave the car and found the door locked, he demanded an explanation. Realizing he was now the main suspect in a double homicide, Frederico was devastated. Frederico couldn't understand how he could be suspected of taking his own daughter's life. Rodrigo soon arrived, and was also shocked that his brother wasn't released. He couldn't believe his niece was dead, asking why there wasn't an ambulance and why no one was trying to help. Both men were taken for questioning, and their alibis were thoroughly checked. Both were cleared, as they were with family at the time of the crime. Then, friends of the deceased were questioned, revealing that Gabriela had been stalked by her ex-boyfriend. They provided screenshots of his messages and voice recordings with threats. Easier to take her life than let her go. Frederico recalled his daughter's obsessive suitor, whom she had tried unsuccessfully to break up with. He never imagined the seemingly pleasant boy Gabriela introduced to him could commit such a heinous crime. The police went to Fabian Cesares' house to investigate. After the double homicide, the young man lived a normal life, interacting with family and friends, visiting familiar places, and even posting a photo on social media, playing guitar at a party. When arrested on suspicion of murder, Fabian feigned surprise and grief, claiming he loved Gabriela and would never harm her. Fabian had disposed of the murder weapon and discarded some blood-stained clothes, but his shoes still had small drops of blood, and prints from his soles were found at the crime scene. Moreover, 4 of Gabriela's classmates testified that they had heard Fabian threaten her, shouting that it would be easier to take her life than let her go. Under pressure from evidence and witness testimonies, Fabian confessed to the crime but tried to portray himself as a heartbroken lover. He claimed he hadn't intended to harm Gabriela, only talk to her, but things escalated, and he dealt with her mother as an unwanted witness. Yet he couldn't explain why he brought a hunting knife just to talk. Will he get the minimum sentence? After the autopsy and necessary tests, the bodies of the victims were returned to their family for burial. Hundreds gathered at the funeral to honor the deceased and offer condolences to their loved ones. Gabriela was buried in the white dress she had dreamed of wearing, but never got the chance to. Carolina was laid to rest in a closed casket, as her face had been mutilated beyond recognition. Fabian's family hired a skilled lawyer who crafted a strong defense and promised a minimal sentence for his client. During preliminary hearings, he emphasized Fabian's youth and clean record, arguing that the attack on his classmate had been settled out of court. The victim's relatives pushed for a femicide charge, but it was denied by the prosecution, as Chile's law only applied it in cases where the victim and perpetrator were married or lived together. Since the teenagers hadn't been in a close relationship at the time of the crime, the case wasn't classified as femicide during the investigation. Additionally, the lawyer argued that Fabian acted impulsively and in a state of distress. Consequently, he faced a potential 15-year sentence for double homicide and assault. The Alcaino family, understandably, demanded the harshest punishment for him. After initial hearings, the judge allowed both prosecution and defense 6 months to gather evidence. Fabian's lawyer requested his release pending trial, but the judge denied this, keeping Fabian in custody. Gabriellas Law. Gabriela's father was outraged. In a short span, he had lost 3 women close to him, all to violent deaths. Now, the person responsible for the deaths of his ex-wife and daughter might get away with a minimal sentence. The lawyer tried to shift the blame onto the victims, and the authorities seemed ready to accept this. So, Gabriela's father and uncle, together with women's rights organizations, developed a proposal for Gabriellas Law, which would expand the definition of femicide to include romantic relationships, even if the perpetrator and victim weren't married or living together. They were soon joined by the National Office for Women and Gender Equality, which actively advocated for the law. The bill faced opposition, as the proposed amendments would mean that perpetrators already serving time for similar offenses could face new charges and lose eligibility for early release. However, feminist organizations across the country supported the Alcaino family, staging marches and demonstrations in favor of Gabriellas Law. In late August 2019, a year and 3 months after the tragic murders, amendments to the femicide law were presented at the highest legislative level. Gabriellas Law included 15 amendments, eventually approved by Congress. Now, in the Republic of Chile, femicide includes any violence, injury, or murder of a woman due to gender-based hatred, regardless of the relationship between victim and perpetrator. Furthermore, If the victim is a minor or has health issues, these are considered aggravating circumstances. Trial and fair sentence. The trial of Fabian Cesares took place in April 2022, 4 years after he attacked his ex-girlfriend and her mother. Following the adoption of Gabriellas Law, the defense was powerless. Fabian was charged with femicide under aggravating circumstances due to one victim being a minor, as well as double homicide and assault. On April 20th, Fabian was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Frederico and Rodrigo addressed the court, thanking the judges for their fair decision. They acknowledged that no sentence could bring back their daughter and niece, but that a life sentence for the perpetrator would protect other women from the same fate as Carolina and Gabriela. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel. There are many shocking stories ahead of you.